please come on stage. Please give him a warm welcome. Dion Hinchcliffe from the Dachis group. So, Dion, you're the Chief Strategy Officer of the Dachis group. You are, one of the key experts in the field of social business in the US market, but also worldwide. So, it's always a pleasure to have you with us as a keynoter here in Hanover. You have been already, I think, twice at CeBIT shows. Is there any change since 2, 3, 4 years ago?
Not as much as I would have hoped. We see that adoption of technology in general is becoming very decentralized. So there are a few leaders that are very far ahead, but the rest of us are all trying to catch up. And I think we still see a lot of people trying to catch up, but we definitely see people now very far ahead too.
So today you're giving us a keynote of frameworks on how we can, build on the business strategy and also get the business orientation into our adoption framework and the transformation framework.
Yes.
So we are really keen to know about your insights.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Bjorn, and thank you for Congress Media for having come speak to you. So I'm hoping to wrap up this conference a little bit and put a bow on it by talking about many of the threads that we've been discussing here about the future of work. We know that it's going to be more open and more participative, and many of us are trying to use social tools which were pioneered in the consumer space, have been tremendously successful in the consumer world for sharing information, for connecting people together. And we want to do the same thing inside our organizations. We believe that will drive performance improvement and real results. And I think it's been hard for us to learn from each other about what has been successful. When I go and talk to a social business project somewhere trying to improve collaboration, they make great discoveries, and both good and not so good. What if we could share them? And we've had frameworks for social business or enterprise 2.0 or whatever it is you want to call it since we started doing this, bringing social media into the workplace. And so I want to talk a little bit about what we know and how we can start applying it and learn from each other, because that's what this is all supposed to be about. Many of you know me. I write on this topic on ZDNet and elsewhere. I've written a couple of books on this subject, and I've been lucky enough to have a front row seat around the world and working with and talking to people who are trying to do this and learning from them. And I'm hoping to share some of that with you today. So I believe that we can start getting a lot better at social business because we've now been doing it for a while. The platforms are better than they ever have been before. They can do things that are designed for businesses. We tried to literally transplant social media into the enterprise with very little changes. And you know what? The consumer world is not the same as the business world. It's a little different, and we need to apply that. And the tools have kind of caught up because we finally discovered some of the things that we need, like really good enterprise search, and we need filters because we can't listen to everyone in the organization. And we need to connect our applications where we do our work with our collaboration tools where we work together. We've been keeping them in two separate places. So we've learned some things about this. We've learned about what makes it more successful, but they're not well captured yet. That's the next stage. I believe we need to capture more about what has worked, what's successful, and how can we better build on other people's investments. If we can learn from each other, we can do this a lot better, I believe. So first, let's talk just a little bit about where are we today with social business. One of the biggest lessons, and I don't see this communicated nearly enough, is that we're starting to see some organizations come out of the end of the process. McKinsey, the famous consulting company, did a rigorous study every year for the last 6 years about what results we're seeing. In this survey, they have over 3,000 organizations applying social tools outside the company, inside the company, with their supply chain. And they noticed a new pattern for the very first time. That's highlighted in the upper right. That organizations, and only a small number, only a few hundred, have come out of the end of the process where they're mostly socially networked. We're never 100%, right? Just like we're never 100% hierarchy and we're never 100% networked, same thing with the technologies. So organizations that have external social network capability and internal, and you're using them widely in their organization, see outsized business benefits, 25%. We see that number now consistently in a number of studies, both of profitability and revenue in organizations. Social business, for those that have adopted it widely inside and outside, are seeing double-digit performance benefits. That's why one of the reasons we believed we wanted to be doing this. And I now think there's strong evidence. There's not just this study, but the Frost and Sullivan and a number of others that have consistently confirmed that what we hoped was true. We didn't know it was true. And so we've learned that organizations that are social get outsized benefits. That's a great story. But I also find the following is true as well. And this is a survey that I did of the Social Business Council. And that is that we're doing social business twice in most companies, and often more than twice. We're doing it on the outside as one project with its own tools, its own staff, and its own policies and procedures and processes. And then we're doing it all over again with another set of tools, another set of staff, and creating another silo for our workers to communicate. We're doing it twice. Social is typically social marketing and social customer care on one side, and workforce collaboration on the other side. Two separate projects doing social business, and that's led to a lot of challenges. Most of us are doing that, right? We find that 96% of projects have almost no connection between the different things that they're doing, even though social is supposed to connect us all together. But if your workers can't use social tools to collaborate with anybody they want to collaborate with, we find that you have performance problems. So a big lesson is that as we see these two sides bumping into each other in more and more organizations, the CEO is asking, why are we doing this all over the place and it doesn't work together, it's not consistent, we have duplication? Can we get better? Because the lesson is, social is part of a single continuum for your business. We all have to be connected across our organization and with our stakeholders, with our business partners, with our suppliers, and with our customers. And whenever we kind of break that model where we're not connecting to everyone, we underperform, right? And that's why many of the organizations back here are seeing some benefits. Even ones that are just starting see 1% to 2% benefits, but they don't get the big value. And it's not until you break down those walls of communication, right? So that was a really important lesson. Any framework that we're going to talk about needs to be able to do that. We've also learned, as I alluded to earlier, that social business cannot be isolated from our work. Because right now you have to go off to the side into your collaboration tool and work together. But all the information and the data and the systems of record, all that's somewhere else. And in the early days, I began to see people copying and pasting like a CRM record into a wiki or in their activity stream or their news feed. Or take a document and copy and paste what's in there, and then they would collaborate on it. But the original document would still be stuck somewhere. That was the official one. So we began to see this problem over and over again, and then there was this famous conversation 2 years ago with Lori Buczek from Intel. She ran a big project, social business project for Intel. She discovered that they were having serious challenges because people, unless they could collaborate where their information was, it just didn't happen. So we cannot isolate social business from work. Any good framework, therefore, must tell us that that is the case. And then we've learned that scale is one of the biggest challenges. If we open up your work process, let's say you open up your team process to anyone in the organization who wants to participate, because they can look over your shoulder and see what you're doing in your activity stream, in your news feed. When you're social and talking about your work, everyone can see it. And we've learned in other parts of the world, like in open source software, that products are almost always much better when more people are involved and getting more feedback and helping you create a better product. This is the working out loud pattern that we're starting to see more and more with social business practitioners. Encourage workers to work out loud and get their stakeholders involved and create the best possible outcome. So we need to do that, but how do we scale that up? How do we make that work? We've learned, for example, that if you try and talk to your customers over social media, thousands of them will suddenly talk back to you, and you have to staff into that. I was talking to the CIO of Time Warner recently, and he said, this social media stuff is terrible because I have to hire 3,000 social media representatives to talk to people who want to talk to us. I pointed out, of course, he had already many more people in his call center, but he said, is this another cost for me, or is there value? So this this is one of the things we need to figure out is how to engage at scale effectively. Can we do that? Any framework will have to help us get there. So we need kind of an updated modern conception that has some of these big aha moments, because we kind of backed into social business by doing pilots, right, in a corner of our organization, or there was a grassroots project, somebody installed a wiki somewhere in the corner of the company, and then it grew really big, right? That's happened over and over again. I've seen in many organizations, the wiki kind of takes over the network because it's the easiest thing to use, and it shares really easy, and everyone can connect with it. So what's useful about these, though, if we can have some sort of way of ensuring that we don't forget about what's most important, because it's easy to do that. And we have to remember what does make social business important is that when you open up your work processes to the network, they will actually do most of the work. That's what's very interesting. We see that's another pattern over and over and over again. The advantage of collaborating with a lot of people is that you're distributing that work and those ideas and all the inputs to a lot more people. And the numbers have borne that up over the years. So maybe that's not even the right question, because if you talk to any of the big companies who might try to help you with social business, the challenge, of course, is that there's this large, complex framework, and I've seen them all over even this conference. And the question is that we're all different as organizations, all right? So can we find frameworks that'll help us in our industry, in our geography? We find that social business usage and adoption patterns are very different in different countries, right? Asia is quite different than Europe. Europe's a little bit different than North America, and South America is another story again. So is there one size fits all? And then there's corporate cultures. What will work just fine in a media company absolutely will not work in a financial services company or an insurance company. They're very different creatures with different rules of operating. And so we need something that will account for that as well, right? So how can we learn from each other if we're all so different? That's another one of our challenges. But we're hoping that if we can learn from each other, we can lower risk, we can get to our results faster, because it takes 9 months. If you put an all-out effort in to create a community, like a customer community or a workforce community of practice to start tackling a problem, it takes 9 months to get traction on average. That's if you throw everybody in there before you start really seeing results. And that's average. Some companies take a lot longer than that. We would like to speed that up. How about better results, too? We need to be able to say, we're doing things in new and different ways. If this is really the future of work, which I think the evidence is starting to show it is, if this is the future of work, we should be seeing new things we haven't seen before, all right? And we should be able to account for that somehow. And I'll allude to what some of those things might be, because I do believe there's evidence for this. All right, so what we see is a general maturing of social business capabilities. We're not nearly as naive as we used to be. Most companies have social tools. They have a social intranet. They're doing some social customer care. They're trying to apply this broadly and become that fully networked organization that sees those outsized results that we'd like to have. And one thing is we've learned that we have to listen better, because when there's a lot more conversations and you can see what your workforce is doing and you can see what your supply chain is doing and you can see what your customers are doing, that's a lot of information. That's millions of conversations for the typical large enterprise. We have to be able to strategically listen. And then when we do, we have to be able to filter and find the things that matter to us. Every single company didn't think 5 years ago that those conversations were that important. Now we know that they're absolutely critical. There's great stories of what's happened when we do this. I'll tell you one in just a moment. And then we analyze for those opportunities. I was in a meeting with a financial services firm, and I was telling them about channel fragmentation. They said the only bad thing about social is there's too many channels. There's always a new social network every week that you have to join. And they don't talk to each other. And they go, yeah, we don't care about conversations out there. And I go, well, you should. They're about you. And they go, yeah, we don't care. So I went into a search engine, social search engine, and found a conversation in the Motley Fool community site. That's the #1 financial services community in the United States. And quickly found one of their customers who was talking about moving a $50 million fund away from them. And they're asking for advice on who to go to. That's absolutely critical information that they need to know. And every company can quickly do the same experiment and find that these conversations are absolutely critical. We have to understand their business context and we have to act on them. And it's the acting on that's the hard part, because we're starting to listen more now. We have, most large companies have listening teams and listening processes to look for the really big things that they have to be aware of. So T-Mobile in the United States wasn't doing too good 2 years ago. It was actually doing quite bad. It didn't have the iPhone. They had a lot of service problems. They didn't have the high-speed internet yet. And so they were losing customers to Verizon and AT&T, and they were desperate. And by the way, when I see companies that are doing particularly well with social business, it's because they were desperate, and they had to try something very new that was potentially disruptive to have any chance. And that's what they did here. They discovered that if they listened to their customers, and this pattern works anywhere in your organization, and their customers were saying the following: I don't like the service, I want an iPhone, I'm going to leave when my contract is up. Oh, my contract is up next week, I'm going to the AT&T store tonight, and then, aha, there's a picture of my new iPhone, all in Twitter. And they would see this pattern not hundreds of times, not thousands of times, but tens upon tens of thousands of times. So what they did that summer, right, the summer of, this would be 2012 now, is they put together a real-time listening campaign. They watched people enter that progression, and then they would immediately reach out to them, because they could identify them because of the information in their social media account, and Twitter will often geolocate it. They would correlate it with their CRM system, see who they are, and go, hey, we know you're unhappy. They would reach out individually and say, we know you're not happy, and we want to do something to fix it. And if they had just reduced customer defections by 10%, that would have been amazing. But they were able to cut customer defections in half in 90 days. That is a remarkable result. And that's because they are at the edge of maturity. They're on the leading edge of maturity. They did all of this. Listen, filter and find, analyze for opportunities, and mobilize advocates to help and solve problems. And the other thing we're seeing, for example, organizations doing is, when I said engagement for scale is a big problem, because enterprises are this big, but the world is that big, or your team is this big, and the rest of your organization that you want to communicate with is that big, and they're all going to talk to you. How do we make that scale? So what we're starting to see is advocate programs emerging on the edge of social business. We both see B2B and B2C advocate programs. And some of these, I like the one from Fidelity. That's a very large financial services firm, right? They have a lot of regulation about what they can say on social media. Their CEO is leading their advocate program. They have 28,000 certified employees who can speak on the behalf of the company in social media. That's remarkable. He talks about it all the time, their CEO. You can find it on YouTube. Sprint has 2,000 advocates in their Ninjas program. They want to get to 8,000 because they think that's how much they'll need to deal with situations that are important. So, because remember, there's millions of people out there talking, all right, and this, again, also scales down inside your company, and you have to have a way of engaging effectively, right? So, on the B2B side, we typically need much fewer advocates, but like Dell has 10,000, all gone through a certification program. And we have to change our organizations. One of the frustrating things when I hear that we have to change our cultures is that corporations have a corporate immune system of some kind. They throw off change very, very quickly, right? They're designed to perpetuate the solution to whatever problem they solve, right? And so the challenge is if we have to change the culture dramatically to be able to get significant results, it's going to be very difficult for us to build that future of work. We need easier processes to onboard to engagement. And so any framework should help us down that road so we can see value every step of the way. And we've seen now the last 2 years, companies creating social media centers of excellence. Because the question I used to get all the time was, where does social go? Who owns it? Is it the IT department? Is it HR? Is it corporate communications? Well, no, because each one of those already has an individual function that doesn't account for all the other ways that you have to use social business. And so what companies have largely concluded, not all of them, But what they've largely concluded is that you have to build this capability that can support the whole organization, right? It's like the IT department, but for social. It supports the whole company with tools and processes and procedures and guidelines, community managers and all the things that you need, and you get rid of duplication and inconsistency, and you become efficient at using social media. And then you become a fully networked organization. At least that's how it's supposed to go. Most companies are in their infancy in building these, but a few are not. One of the biggest ones here in Europe is Nestle, has a fantastic social media center of excellence. So we got to scale the processes. We need org structures for doing things like working out loud that I talked about. And then we have to act. That's the hardest part, is we listen, we get all this information, but we have to do something about it. If you don't manage to what you've learned from social business, from the streams of information flowing through your company and through your supply chain and through the rest of your organization outside, if you're not tapping into those opportunities, like a big customer leaving and he's telling everyone for the world to see and you don't even listen to it, or worse, you don't do anything about it, what does that mean for you as a business? You got to close the loop. And then we see social business adoption is very industry specific. Financial services firms, tech firms, and media firms all jumped on and did this 5 years ago. And everyone else kind of waited. Now we see, insurance companies, and now we see manufacturers right now. Manufacturers everywhere are getting into social business. So it takes a while. So if it hasn't happened in your industry, you have time to be a leader and get those double-digit benefits for a couple years before everyone else shows up. So remember that. Disrupt the competition. So do we need frameworks that capture all those lessons learned? Right. That's really the question that I've been asking. Do we have what we need? Have we learned enough to start building the next generation of social business frameworks? And we should remind ourselves what that is. A framework is a pre-built approach with holes cut out for the details of your business. So it has to account for the fact that you're special in some way, right? And we've had them, as I said, from the start. This is one of the earliest ones I could find. There's another one that has, things like social CRM when that became big, which is still, by the way, the easiest way to justify your social business project, because you'll get a 30% benefit for almost no spend, and then you can do almost anything you want. Here's one that we did for a very large company about how to create a social media center of excellence. Dave Gray has been getting a tremendous amount of attention for his ideas around pods. This is the management theory we've always wanted behind the tools. We had the tools, but now we're like, well, how do we change how we manage our organizations? Dave, I think, is among the farthest along in figuring out the management ideas, how our management processes change in the face of social tools. We have to relook operations. This is my view on how you have to rethink operations. All the moving processes that are required to be a social business. And here's all the parts as well. And then can't forget things like community management. That is the most important capability. I've talked to several people here at the conference today where they're still not thinking about community management. That's going to be your biggest ongoing cost, period. Biggest investment, period, in social business is your community management team. And by centralizing them and then also having subject matter expert community managers, there's a maturity model we need to find, and the speed and success of your adoption is directly correlated with how much you've invested in community management. We're also missing a very important thing, because the good thing about social businesses is they're largely not led by technical people. In fact, the IT department is usually the least interested in social media. It's usually the business side that's much more interested in making this happen. But they've forgotten all the battles we had 20 years ago to make all this stuff talk to each other. When technology first grew up, none of these parts fit together. Nothing talked to each other. Everyone had a proprietary stack. And we're getting back to that. And we've forgotten that with social media. I'm a board member of the Open Social Foundation, and I tell everyone I meet, let's not forget that. Let's make sure this all stuff talks to each other, because right now most social networks will not talk to each other. Most social tools will not talk to each other. We're going back to a bad place. I'm hoping that we'll fix that. All right, but can we even change our DNA if we have that plan? If I gave you a framework, is that going to change the DNA of your company to be a social business? That's the problem. It's not clear to me. If frameworks were the answer, you guys would be downloading them off the internet all the time, and then you'd be off and be a social business. All right, that's not happening. And so we used, in our book, Social Business by Design, we just put 10 tenets. Remember these 10 things, and as long as you keep doing them, because when you do the 1,000 things you have to do to become a social business, you forget what's important, what matters most. How can we remember that? It's about community-led and open business processes, emergent self-organizing outcomes. Again, in my book, I found 100 really high-impact examples of all of these. More transparency, which means more available knowledge to use as a weapon in your organization. Better engagement everywhere. And there's a direct correlation between engagement and all the success metrics of a company, from profitability to customer retention. The more engaged your stakeholders are, that's workers, partners, customers, the better you are. And there's plenty of evidence that social tools directly correlate with engagement. And then high scale and cost-effective results. Social media processes scale up much bigger. If you want to throw an army of advocates, and you want to throw everyone in your organization who knows about some really important topic, and you want to mobilize them on a subject very quickly and get everyone's input and make all the pieces fit together, nothing works better than social tools for doing that. So there is a broad pattern emerging for any framework that will succeed for us. It has to be highly decentralized and account for that. Put most processes under user control. Has to be able to cope with constant change, because the consumer world's changing faster than we are by quite a bit, right? So any process would have to hopefully at least prevent the gap from widening. It'd be adaptive to those changes, enable a local autonomy, all right, and be sustainable, something we can do for years and years. And the only thing that I'm really seeing, almost none of the frameworks I put up there, actually none of them, or that I'd be able to do any of those things in a complete list. They all do some of those things. So what we're seeing instead is organizations are saying, you know what, we are getting a pretty good sense of how social customer care is working, or how social supply chain is working, right? Or how workforce or team collaboration works. And we have things, there are blueprints for those emerging. So we're seeing functional frameworks, functional blueprints for parts of the business that you're ready to tackle, right? I'm ready to be social over here and get those results. We're seeing that people are looking for blueprints. All right, what did you guys do? And normally, like social customer care, you can easily go and look at what other companies are doing, at what the leaders are doing, and just copy them. That's what we really see is happening. So in the end, what most organizations need is just a way to cross-check. What are we forgetting? What do we got to include to be successful? What can't we forget? What are the important things, the timeless things we can't forget about this new way of working? And so most organizations end up doing it themselves. They end up building their own framework. They go and they collect the best things. I'm going to take a little bit of pods, and I'm going to take a little bit of social business architecture, and I'm going to remember the standards, and I'm going to add the community management maturity model. That's what most organizations are doing today, and it works. If you look at the leaders, that's what they're doing, is they're borrowing from the best, right? They're copying from the brightest, and they're making it work. But the best ones do it with their community. Forcing people to use social tools doesn't work very well either. It kind of works, but if you redesign a process to be social and it's the only way to get it to work, well, guess what's going to happen? That does work, and that is another adoption strategy. So this is what most next generation organizations are doing. And that is the end of my presentation. I don't know how we are for time, if you have any questions.
We take our time for
Okay.
questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. So, thank you. We take our time for the questions.
thank
So we're a little bit over time, but
Okay.
it's fine.
I appreciate that.
So you're saying that we don't have one blueprint for social business.
No, it does not exist today.
And it's also not industry specific, it's process specific. So we might find a blueprint for customer service, might find for operations, but that's the way we have to look at it.
Yeah, so I think there are parts of the frameworks that we want, and because all of our organizations are unique and have individual requirements, that we can take the parts that we like the best and try and make them fit together, yes.
Yeah. So, but this is really, if we have this functional way, then this is really must be driven and led by some kinds of some kinds of leaders in the middle management, because this is not, again, the vision of the CEO. So is the awareness of this importance to drive the business on this functional level and towards also social business already equally distributed on the middle management in the industries?
So that's a great point. The research shows, this is IBM's research, that middle managers are the least prepared to help the organization adopt social business, but they're the ones that have the most management contact with the organization. But something like 3/4 of them have said, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I have people in the bottom asking me to use them, and I have people from the top telling me to do it, right? But this is not my thing. So what I've seen, though, a number of successful efforts. One is Cemex, the cement company in Mexico. They deliberately embraced middle managers, and they rolled out the tools to them 2 months ahead of time. And they said, we want you to make this yours. We want to give you time to think about how you want to lead your part of the organization and learn the tools and learn how to explain it to your workforce so you can be the social business leader instead of someone coming in from the outside telling everyone to be social and leaving, right? That doesn't seem to work very well. They achieved near 100% adoption, 98% within, I think it was 6 months. And that's the best I've ever heard. And not by forcing people, but by using this model where they got the managers on board. So I think that's the role model.
Okay. So what is your final recommendation for the people sitting here and going back to the office tomorrow, next week? So what should they tackle first?
So I think you have to think globally for your organization, right? Everyone is in the social media department now, right? Whether you want to or not. It doesn't mean literally everyone should tweet for the company or should post inside. Some people just clearly should not. But everyone's in the social media organization, and they have to contribute, but you act locally in doing that. And so we can now have a lot of great examples. We heard for 2 days here examples of what's happening that we can learn from. And if we do that and act locally, I think we're going to get farther along.
Great.
Yep.
Thank you, Dion Hinchcliffe. Please, a big applause for Dion Hinchcliffe. He came a long way.